I mean, all the scary villains in Narnia are witchy women, the girls aren't allowed in battle, and Aslan even excludes Susan from heaven because she's into makeup and boys. These are the allegations of C.S. Lewis' sexism in the Narnia series. But was C.S. Lewis actually sexist? And do the Narnia books portray women in harmful ways? Let's get into it. Hey everyone, Sarah Kwan here. I'm ready to dive into this big question. So make sure you like, subscribe, and comment on this video. In my last video, I explored whether C.S. Lewis is racist, as he has been accused. I looked at evidence rather than vibes in not only the Narnia books, but in his other writing and in his life. And I came to the conclusion that there simply is not enough evidence to outright call him racist, but rather I think he was a product of his time and possibly a little bit xenophobic. However, when it comes to the sexism allegations, if we once again look into evidence in his life and other writings, well, there's a bit more evidence on this front. And once again, Phillip Pullman is adamant that this is the case. He called the Narnia series monumentally disparaging of women. But do we agree? So firstly, let's look at examples in the books. Secondly, I want to observe Lewis's life and his relationships with women. And thirdly, I will consider some of his other writings and opinions regarding women and what that means for our thesis here. So what are the accusations here? Let's start with my first point of reference. There are plenty of examples in the Narnia books of what we would now consider sexist remarks. There's Diggory arguing with Polly, saying you're being just like a girl, or Edmund saying very much the same thing to Lucy. And there's also the fact that the two most frightening and powerful villains in the series are women, the White Witch, Jadis, and the Woman of the Green Kirtle. Furthermore, when Father Christmas gives Lucy and Susan long-ranged weapons and healing potions, he gives the boys swords and shields. And in doing so, he says, and I quote, "Battles are ugly when women fight." But probably the part that gets the most criticism is at the end of the last battle, when the three of the Pevensie children are now in what we find out to be is heaven with Aslan, and they ask, where is Susan? Susan is no longer a friend of Narnia. She has denied Narnia, saying it was simply a childhood fancy, and she's more interested in boys and makeup. So people have taken a lot of issue with that point, and I think these all add up to certainly raise question marks, to be sure. But I do think that for the most part, the way the children bicker was reflective of the time, and the actual reason that Susan was excluded from Narnia was for denying Aslan, which is like denying Christ. But I do think it's weird that Lewis had to tack on those other grievances at the end, saying, oh yes, she loves girly things, and that's also an issue. He does seem to have some kind of hang up about vanity, women's vanity, because there's not only this example of, Susan's more into clothes and makeup than Narnia. There's also the part in The Voyage of the Dawn Treader when Lucy suddenly gets overcome with vanity, which to me felt really shoehorned in because we never saw Lucy care about vanity, not once in the previous 4 books. So why all of a sudden is she so overpowered by vanity? It really points to Lewis having some kind of issue with women's vanity. But to me, probably the most eyebrow-raising part in the books is the fact that the two strongest, scariest, most evil villains are women and witches. And they both have this motive of capturing young men. The White Witch captures Edmund, and the Lady of the Green Kirtle captures Lily. There's some kind of seediness here that didn't sit too well with me, if I'm honest. I can't say outright that the two strongest villains are women, therefore it's sexist. In fact, you could argue the other way around, that, women in a position of power, this is more of balancing the scales. And indeed, they were well thought out characters. They are actually scary. To me, the issue lies not simply with their existence, but the fact that there is no other male villain of their same caliber, and there is no other female benevolent character to the same caliber as Aslan. And yeah, the fact that they both have this seedy motivation of capturing young men, to me, that raises questions. Now, secondly, let's have a look at Lewis's life and his relationships with women. We know that his mother died when he was young. After that, it was just himself, his brother, and his father, and he went to an all-boys school. Then he became a soldier, where he's once again completely surrounded by men at all times. Now we come to a really interesting bit. Whilst enlisted, Lewis befriended another man, Paddy Moore, and it was said by Moore's sister that the two of them made this pact together. Should one of us fall in battle, the survivor will take care of the other's family. And what do we know? Moore was killed in 1918. Lewis kept his end of the bargain, and he lived with and looked after Paddy's mother, Janie King Moore, until her hospitalization and eventual death, starting in 1940. So they cohabited for this, over 20 years. There is a lot of speculation when it comes to this relationship. According to the servants, the visitors of the house, and the friends, they kept separate quarters, and Lewis would introduce her as his mother, remembering, of course, that his own mother passed away when he was a child. But they had this great affection and intimacy, and this was observed by friends, and it made people, talk and raise eyebrows. And there is this long-standing academic debate where Lewis and Mrs. Moore lovers. We simply don't know. We will never know. But also considering, Lewis didn't take any wife during this time. He was not really known to be going out a-courting. And they were indeed cohabiting and displaying this great affection. And also considering, Mrs. Moore's daughter, Maureen, she wasn't sure either. She seemed to think there was a possibility. So I think, there's a chance that they were more than just friends. We really cannot know. We will never know. But we do know that Lewis did not take a wife until 1952. This is much later in his life, with his long-standing pen pal friendship, fellow academic, Joy Davidman Gresham. And he adopted her two sons from a previous marriage, and by all accounts, they seemed very happy. And it was also said that he loved her because he saw her as an academic equal, which sort of infers that every woman he's met in the past was not his academic equal, which, once again, we can add that to the pile of question marks. But for all we know, they were very happy until his death some 10 years later. Now, coming to my third point, my third topic, his other writings and opinions. Now we get to some real meat here, some pretty solid evidence in my opinion. As discussed 2 videos ago, Lewis was in his youth a very loud atheist, a very loud and proud atheist, and then he eventually came back around and returned to Christianity later in life. He converted to Anglicanism, and he then very loudly took issue with women having the priesthood. He said that, that only men can represent Christ. And again, to me, this is a pretty solid piece of evidence that he had some kind of hang-ups when it comes to women. He also championed traditional gender roles and marriage roles, especially noted in the final of his space trilogy, That Hideous Strength. Readers have criticized this novel for presenting this idea of a perfect Christian marriage, which is hierarchical and, only the man can lead and make decisions. The woman is just there for decoration. And to be honest, having read some of the critiques of the book, I think we can put some of it to simply inexperience. As I've said, he spent most of his life as a bachelor and hanging out with other men. He did not marry until much later in life, so it's possible he was just simply ignorant. He didn't know what women wanted or even how to write a realistic relationship. However, once again, I'm not going to dismiss this evidence. I think we can add it to the pile of question marks. And that leads me to where I can finally look at this pile of evidence and answer the question. Was C.S. Lewis sexist? By the standard of the day, I think he was pretty average. Pretty much, most of the people around him would have had similar ideas. But by today's standard, I think he definitely had some internalized misogyny and just personal hangups with women on the whole. These are just, it's made so apparent by the way he writes women in his books, especially, the Narnian witches, and to me, this primeval idea that women cannot have leadership roles or be academic. I simply disagree. But once again, I hesitate to just call him a sexist pig and cancel him and throw away all my Narnia books. Rather, I think we can look at his life and writing with a critical lens, knowing that he was, once again, a white man in the mid-century UK, and also he's dead, so I can't really ask him. If we could talk face-to-face and have a friendly debate, of course, it would be easier to come to a more solid conclusion. But what do you think? Was old Jack a sexist pig? Should we put him in the same category as another author, She Who Must Not Be Named? Are you in Philip Pullman's camp on this one? Do you think that he was a misogynistic prick? Which of these arguments do you think holds the most water, and which ones did I miss? Please like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you on the next video. Please watch my previous video, and please give me a little support. You can buy me a coffee, and I'll see you next time, everyone. Bye!